Welcome. Pleasure to have you all here today. For most of you, I assume it's a review. Anybody brand new to Gen 2 this year? Okay. Anybody else? Colors of planters. Everybody pretty well green, blue. Anybody red? Any whites in my crowd? Okay. So we'll talk pretty general settings at that stage. Those of you that haven't been around it, basically there's a couple of things I want to start off with. This is pretty typical screen that we would see. You have capability to set this up, so it's up to you. Over on the right-hand side, there's a setup button. So let's click on that. And let's go to the System tab. And under the System tab, so that's what I call file folders up across the top. That System tab, there's a Display button. Let's push on the display. And in that, the second box up on the top there is Sound Settings. So we can come in there and we can actually set every one of these. We have alarms, alerts, and the key press. Slide your volume bar down, but remember where you started. Now, before we get done today, I want to turn those back up for you. So you can either slide them all the way down. Basically, all you got to do is click on it, and they just slide up or down. Or you can actually set the sounds to off. And there's a number of different settings in here you can use for the alarms, the alerts. Okay. It's up to you what you like. There's actually a down arrow that if you push on, you get a few additional items as well. Okay, some of these I don't quite understand why they even put them in here, but it's whatever gets your attention when you're in the cab. So we can go back to the main tab. And for those of you that haven't been around it before, this setup button becomes a pretty standard item we go to. And if I first pull that up, it defaults to what I call the planter tab. And here's where you're going to spend a fair amount of time. Every time I change something, I have to come here. Now my planter tab, that top left quadrant, basically once that's set up, it's a once and done. I really don't change that very often. I'm going to assume you're going to leave it pretty well set to standard systems. I am going to turn on a RowFlow Liquid here. And the rest of it we'll just kind of live with. So you can set up my back button. So the top left quadrant is a once and done. The top right quadrant, this is where I change my fields. So I want you all to have your field set up. You guys that are new, okay, we're actually going to have a client, a farm, and a field for every system that we have. So if you farm 15 different fields, you're going to have 15 different field names is how I set it up. Okay. I do farm with a cousin, so I actually have different farms. I keep all of his under one farm name. I keep all of mine under a different farm name. It's up to you how you like to set this up. But once it's set up, you're probably not going to come back in here unless I'm actually switching fields. So if I pull into a field, first thing I want to check is, am I set to the right field? And I'm assuming that's a scary thing. Now, the other thing, the bottom quadrants. So population, I need some kind of a set point for what I'm looking for. If you are a single rate and you live with, you fill in the blank, 32,000. All I need is one item. I need 32,000. If I've got prescriptions, I'm going to have the different, what I call set points, basically the different areas that I'm looking for. and what the correct population would be. The only thing that quadrant does and controls is back here on the home page, I'm looking to see on that population. So that top quadrant says population, and I want it to be green. And you notice when I get above 33,000, so that high row of 8, when it gets below 33, it actually stays green. That is a trigger, is all that set point does, is trigger the color of that box. And we have that same thing for all my different boxes. So my expectation is that all your screens are going to be pretty well green when you're planting. Anytime it flashes yellow, means something's out of range. So if I come back to that box, I was looking for 29,000, 32, or 35. If I'm off more than 1,000 seeds, it's going to change color of the box. That's all that does. And then my hybrids, we can actually select my hybrid. We can assign that to whatever rows. I can come in here. I can actually assign different hybrids to that. If I come here to hybrid B, and you notice I don't have any hybrids, so I can come in here and I can add another hybrid. Maybe I'm on a Whiffles, and you notice it'll come up, it'll give you suggestions, and you notice I got an arrow down box. So those are all pre-built into it. And you notice they use a capital D and a capital K, and I just typed in capital D to small k. So it's looking for it. I can actually add by own, or I can actually use what I call a pre-selected. Okay? And you notice it's telling me on the right-hand side there's 978 hybrids that are built into this that have a DK in that system. So whatever you're using, you can come through here. And now I can take that a step farther. If I'm going with a Pioneer, I can come back in here. Oop. I can add a hybrid, and I can start to look for a Pioneer number. Now, sometimes we spell the whole thing. Let me back up. So, if I could type, I got my X off just a bit. So I can actually add anyone. I can use out of the pre-selected, or I can actually assign that. I can assign, so if I'm doing a split row planter, I can assign that to left, right, or I can do all the rows as a single hybrid. Totally up to you how you utilize this. So that's the 4 quadrants underneath the planter. Any questions on those? The only things you change on here is when I change fields or when I change hybrids. Now the next box, or the next file folder tab, is what we call the systems, and we were there once. Let's kind of walk through what I call my display first. So here's my display, and these are all defaults. Now I do have this in demo mode. You probably don't have that on yours. Okay. I've got what I call dashboard view. So here's where I can come in and I can actually change the configuration of my dashboard. So I let you select what you want. And right now, I have some boxes that I can control, and I have some boxes you can't. So right now I have 8 boxes, 2 rows of 4. If I do the 2 by 2, basically I've only got 4 items. So depending upon what all you want to see on your screen, I give you that capability to see that information. Now when I go back to home screen, that's what I have set up. If I come in here and I want to change something, I come to dashboard view. If I punch on a button, these are the things I can add into those boxes. So I got skips, I got SRI, good ride, seed spacing, hex shaft. Hex shaft would only be used if you are a ground drive planter. Would not be used for anything else. I've got Air Force, I've got row flow on here. I can just keep hitting this arrow down. It gives me more boxes of information that I have in here. I'm going to put low speed start on here. So now when I come back here, I've changed the box and what you're seeing in that at that stage. Okay. So back to my setup, to my system, and my display. We've been on the sound settings. We can go back. We've got date, time. If I'm hooked up to GPS, that should pull that in automatically. If I'm not hooked up, it's where I was last. Now I have dashboard mini scroll, and basically all this is down here at the bottom. So what I call this bottom dashboard, basically you notice I'm scrolling through right now. I'm showing ride quality, good spacing, downforce. It's going to scroll through whatever I have set. So if I don't have room for my boxes up above, I can actually add things down here, but it shows me every row on my planters I'm going through that field. So if I've got 12 row, you'll have 12 boxes, 16 rows. If I've got a 24, you'll have 24 boxes. So again, those are the things I can actually set. Basically, if I don't want to see it, I can just X them out. Now you notice on the right-hand side, I have capability to do what I call scrolling. So I can lock it on a particular unit. If I just want to see population, yeah, I got it pre-recorded, I'm sorry. I can't even show you just population only. Now you can select how long it's going to stay on that box. I like 5 seconds because as I'm running through the field, I'm going to live with what I have at that stage. Screen brightness, you're probably not going to change. My jump to row, my row failure. You've got two options. One is when it's set to jump to row. If I run out of corn on row 12, that's going to pop up to the whole screen. My other option is to jump to the dashboard. So those are the two that I can actually select. Up to you how you want to do that. Those are just customizable settings from your standpoint. Quick adjust population if I'm doing prescriptions or I want to actually increase my population. So if I was on soybeans, I probably don't want 500. I probably want more like 1,000 or 2,500. I happen to be on corn at the moment, so we'll leave it at the 500. There is a button down there on the bottom left, what I call calibrate the touch screen. Basically, if this is how we calibrate, when I push, if it doesn't come up to the right location, So I have to go around. It's asking me that my thumbprint needs to be close. And it tells you it's successfully calibrated. The other things, how many people are using it for yield sense, monitoring the combine? This is also on the right-hand side is where you would switch to that. Changes your whole screen. Basically, have to restart the monitor at that point. So from a display standpoint, that's going to pretty well be the main items there. You do have a crops tab. Here's basically, this is kind of a once and done, unless I'm changing population. So basically what I'm saying is I have default population. I've actually set up that I'm using smart firmer on this planter. I've got liquid on this planter, so I can come in here and actually tell what my limits are of where I want that to give me a limit. If I look at the adjustments, basically, if I'm off more than 1,000 population, it's going to change. If I get below 80% population, it's going to blow the alarm at me. Singulation, if I get below 98.5, it's going to change colors on me. If I get good ride below 90, okay. Now, if I'm running airbags on this planter. That's why I have that set at 90. If I was running a hydraulic, I would probably have that set to 95. And you notice my SRI limit there is actually at 20. If I'm running, let me go back. Let's talk about SRI while I'm here. So I've got SRI showing me at a 9 right now. And you notice my speed, I'm driving 5 miles an hour. SRI is 8.8, good ride is 98%. I just speeded up. So I went up to 7 miles an hour. You notice my good ride went down. Okay, I've got more row unit bounce. My SRI is climbing at the same time. So if I look at that SRI, what am I telling you? I'm sitting up there 14, 15 SRI. There's a lot of confusion around what SRI is. It's what we call seed release index. I look at seed going past my seed sensor eye. So if I'm in a regular seed tube, that's sitting up 12, 14 inches up off the bottom of the seed tube. And I'm saying every seed from seed 1 to seed 2, how much variation did I have? And if I show you a 10 on my SRI, I'm actually saying that if I was planting 34,000, every time I dropped a seed, how much variation, what would that look like on the ground? So a 10 is 10%. So if my target is 6 inches between seeds, 10% of 6 is 0.6. So anywhere if my seed is from 5.4 to 6.6, I'm going to show you a 10 SRI. If that changes and goes from 5 to 7, okay, now I'm up at a 15% SRI, or a 15 is what we would call that. So all I'm really doing is at the higher speeds, yes, I have a higher SRI. It's really telling me I have bounce on my row unit, and the seed that's actually falling past that eye is varying more than when I'm going slower. Are we comfortable with that? Yes. Okay, so it correlates to spacing in a way. When I look at spacing, so spacing is actually a man-made number. And what I'm going to tell you is when I set the monitor up, I have to select what am I comfortable with for spacing. So typically we set what I call a 2.5 to 4 for a 30-inch row planter. If my seed gets closer than 4 inches, so 4 inches between them, we call that a misplaced seed. If I get closer than 2.5, we would call that severely misplaced. Okay, now I have to tell it what that number is. SRI doesn't care what the number is. It's actually going to say a percentage of where my target population is. Now, what can be misleading is if I'm planting 30,000, my SRI of 10% is different than an SRI of 10% at a 34,000, 36,000. So if I'm using a prescription and I'm varying 4,000 or 5,000 population from the high ground to the low ground in my field, my SRI is changing, but it's not a great indicator of what's going on. I have to be aware of that at that stage because I don't have a way to build that into the formula because it doesn't know what you're going to plant prior to what SRI is. Spacing says I draw the line. 4 inches, I call it a misplaced seed. So if I'm trying to fine tune a planter and I know that I have some problems with it, I'm going to tighten that up and I might go to 4.5 inches. So now I want my seed between 4.5 and maybe 2 inches. Okay.
I'm going to jump in just real quick, and I mentioned it in the last session, but a lot of you guys are going to be able to, sometimes when you look at singulation, we can singulate pretty good. So that doesn't necessarily mean that if you're singulating at 100% or 99.9%, that if you don't have any type of a delivery system in your tube, that doesn't necessarily correlate that every seed is spaced exactly at 6 inches. So that's why we're coming in with some of our SRIs and some of our other numbers, because as those numbers start to stretch out, what it's basically telling us, as Ken has talked about, and I want to kind of make you think through this a little bit, something else is going on. Do we have parallel linkage that is worn? Are ketons possibly, instead of being flat, are they pointed? Are they actually moving seed? Because a lot of times what we correlate, we think I planted corn at 99%, so when I go out in the field, I should have, this is what my stand should look like. So we're reading what your meter's telling we're dropping you at, but we're not necessarily telling you what happened until it come up. So that's the pieces that we have to figure out. So that's where the whole conversation of row cleaners, parallel linkage, bushings, arms, seed disc openers, how you create the trench, which we'll get into deeper. But just remember, because again, I'm trying to emphasize this more as we deal with growers. People, I think, correlate thinking that I singulated really well, so I'm going to have a really good stand. That's the goal, but that doesn't mean that it automatically happens. I don't mean to add confusion to it, but hopefully that makes sense in a little bit. So we're trying to give you guys more information to try to connect those two dots. So we can singulate good, but if we're not getting the final stand that we want, what's the pieces that are missing to get us to that point? Is that clear?
Yeah, very much so, because I always say there's two pieces to this corn planter. I have to meter it. That's its own animal. That is population, that is singulation. I have to deliver to the ground. That is a whole different equation. And I'm running into, a lot of growers are running into parallel arms that are war. My SRI is going up. So even though I metered it correctly, I didn't get it delivered to the ground because as the field, I'm going through the field, my row unit's doing a little bit of this. I'm loosing the gills is what I call that. Okay? Yeah, so when we talk about this misplaced seed limit, okay, this is spacing. So here where I come into my adjustments, If I pull that up, there's my choices of what I can put in. So the 2.5, 4 is the standard default for 30-inch rows. If I don't change that, that's what I'm going to say. If a seed is 4.1 inches away from the target, I'm going to call that good spacing, but you're going to be disappointed when I walk the field and you got a 4-inch variation between seeds at that point, right? So I can actually tighten that up and I can take that a little tighter. Now understand, when I do that, spacing is going to drop. Okay, so it's a great way to test this planter. If I'm in a no-till, if I'm in a rough riding field, you're not probably going to be happy with what you're seeing because it's going to tell you, whoa, you got a problem. What are you going to do about it? Okay, is it a tillage? Do I need to go in and level the field? Or maybe you've been in with a field cultivator and in that damp spot where you went through it, you got a lot of clods. Is that going to affect ride? Absolutely. As a ride is affected, will that affect my misplaced seed limits? Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the question is, he's on the corn active page on the limit adjustments. Is that where you're on? Okay. Okay. Yeah, so all this is really doing is changing where I change my colors on that front screen. Okay. Yeah, you may be on soybeans. That would have a whole different. So my crop is corn at the moment. Okay. Now, while I'm on this crop page, you notice I have all my rows set to active. When would I ever not have all rows active? Unless you're a seed corn grower, you probably will not have that changed. Or maybe if I'm doing sweet corn, I'm just doing 4 rows. I don't want my alarm to blow at me while I'm planting with only 4 rows of my 16-row planter. I can come in here and actually only look at those 4 rows. Now there's another box here, the economic adjustments down in that bottom left. And this is what I would tell you, you probably want to change. Now, you notice what I have here. It takes 140 ears to make a bushel of corn. My price per bushel is the one I would probably encourage you to fine tune. Now, some people don't like to change that. I default to 250. I think you can market corn better than 250. Although a couple days, I know a few of you started to wonder, right? But why does that become important to me? Back here on the home page, I don't have it on this particular page. Sometimes I have my loss per acre is showing good right now. So if I'm losing under $5 an acre at this point, and that is based off of spacing, SRI. Okay, that's where I'm pulling this information from. And you're going to notice when I speed up, now I actually starting to lose more money, and that's at 250. If I change that to $4, now I would be having a loss up at what? 14 bucks an acre. What does it take for you to push in the clutch? Okay. I don't know. That's just, it's there. Be aware of it. I'm not telling you where to set it. That has to be up to you at that point. Now, I can actually come in here. I can change to soybeans. And you notice that I have to change my settings or otherwise I'm going to be wrong. So my population, I need to set up to about 120,000 is what I happen to plant. I'm going to use a standard 56-row soybean disc. I'm going to leave everything else pretty well set there. My seeds to average, so it's looking at the last 1,500 seeds to pull an average as I'm planting through. I'm probably going to change my quick adjust up to either 1,000 or 2,500. Economic adjustments doesn't really come into play here because of I don't have a way to build that for soybeans. I'm going to go back. I'm going to change this back to corn. Are we comfortable on what we're seeing here? I have a diagnose page. So if you have any issues, this is going to be where you're going to come. I expect every box to be green. And you're looking here and you're saying, well, Ken, you got a problem. Yes, I do. Okay. And it says row flow is red. So red says device has failed or it's looking for it, but it's not finding it. So I told it I had row flow, but I'm not hooked up to the planter. So that's a problem. I told it I had smart firmer, but I'm not hooked up to any smart firmers. So that's a problem. So it's always going to tell you what's going on. And I can dial in. So here I can look at my display. So there's the information I'm seeing on my display. I haven't plugged in a username. Basically, I plugged in, I started, so it defaulted to January 1. You notice my disk usage is 5%. I would like you all to pull this up and double check what your disk usage is. So back here from your home screen, you go to diagnose. You should have a display button. And if you pull that up, does it tell you what your disk usage is? Are you under 50%? Anybody that's not? Okay, 74%. Okay, so we need to download some data before you go to the field this spring. So I can export my old crop maps and take that information off the display. Okay. If I'm at 50, right at it, and here's what I would tell you. I should have enough space for 10,000 acres. Now understand, if I harvest with it, I'm using yield monitor, it's doubling my acres, right? So from an acre standpoint, I may be able to hold it, but as I get closer to full, it slows down the processing speed. So if you're comfortable waiting on a monitor, not a problem. I'm not ever happy waiting for anything. Okay? Let's just put that right out there up front. I can barely stand waiting at a red light. So if you're not under 50, I'd like you to make sure before we get to spring, we're going to download some data and get that below 50%. Okay? While I'm in here, every one of these boxes I should be able to punch on. So there's my Air Force. Basically, I can go in, I can look at all my information. At any given time, it'll tell me what my tank pressure is, what the temperature of the compressor is. A lot of this information you don't need to know, but it is recorded and it's actually kept track of. So here on this screen here with my diagnose, if I have Air Force and it's green, I can actually pull that up. Some of you are going to have to be hooked up to a planner before you're going to be able to do that. So if I'm ever at this page, you notice my valve manifold. I'm looking at the down increase in the vent. So basically, my vent is releasing air out of my airbags. The increase is when I'm adding air. I really, when I'm in the field, I don't want you to be over about 5%. If you have over 5%, it's probably telling me I have a leak somewhere in that system. Okay, it's trying to either add air or subtract air. On any of my 4 valves, okay? So if you have a down-only system, you only have 2 valves, down and the down increase and the down vent. If I have lift bags on my airbags, then you have all 4 boxes. I'm measuring that side of it. Hydraulic downforce, you will not have this. Instead of seeing Air Force, you're going to see Delta Force. It's going to be I think it says DF in that box. Or do you say Delta Force? It does so. Okay. Sometimes they abbreviate that. So even like here on RowFlow, I'm looking for information. So if I had hydraulic motors, I'm actually looking at this and I'm saying, well, it's looking for swath control. I got a 16-row planter. I got 8 clutches set up on that. So I got 2-row clutches. But you notice on my motor drives, it's looking for a motor, one hydraulic drive motor on that whole planter. And if I'm in the field, it should be green. It should always tell me what my pressure is, what my PWM is, what my actual RPMs versus command. So I can see that information at any given time. Okay, since I'm red, I can't see this information today. Now the seed data box is another box we use some. Basically at this stage, I'm in a demo mode, so I'm actually planting seed. You're not going to see this, but I'm showing you my actual population per row. I'm telling you what I'm commanding it and what I'm actually seeing. And you notice I'm also showing my SRI on this page. So I use this page a fair amount. If you're suspicious you have a problem, over here on the right-hand side, it's actually measuring how many seeds we've dropped since you turned it on. If I come in here and hold it, it will reset that. It'll go back to 0. And that should count up pretty close, row by row by row, or otherwise I'm telling you I have a meter issue going on that field. So it's a quick way just to verify, do I have something, do I have a string caught? Or maybe, has anybody ever had where a seed chip gets caught in a cell? Okay, and at this stage, if I come in here, I'm going to have a low count on that row. So it's telling me now you're also seeing a singulation issue. You're seeing a number of issues because it's acting like a skip at that point. But it's a way to verify what am I really seeing. We also have a box up here called log file. And that's basically just telling me since I turned on, so I've lost my SRMs on a couple of rows. I've adjusted reference values. These are all things that I've done since I turned on here. This is only a diagnose-only feature, and that would only be if you had the Tonner team probably working with you on it. Questions on my diagnose screen? Then I have a data tab. So here's where we actually do our software update, is from data. And if I punch on the software update, it's going to ask for the USB stick. Now, we really don't change software on Gen 1s, Gen 2s. Basically, we've stopped because we're not adding new products for it to control. It'll continue to run everything. So if you're at, and you notice I'm on 2020.0.1, I don't have a problem if you're on a 2020.0.4. That would be the most current version we have out there. Okay. One's okay. Basically what I've done between the .1 and the .4 would be if I'm running smart firmwares, I've got a little more information built into the algorithms. Now the other things we have here, here's where I would come to export my data. I would encourage all of you to take a USB stick and download my planner config. So it's telling me my implement, my seed. I would encourage you to download your system and your crop config, which gives you your field, your farm field client, all that information. Yes. So from data, you go to export, okay? And this is where we're going to see this. I would like all this data backed up to a USB stick. If you've got a newer style tractor that has the armrest, got storage in it, just throw that stick in there. Perish the thought, sometimes glitches happen in technology and your display will blank out. or lightning can strike. I don't have to re-enter all my information. Boom, you shove it in and it's good to go. Okay. Everything that says config. So planning config, system config, and crop config. Okay. Yeah, so let's go back to data. Okay, so actually there's a delete button here. Now, it's going to ask, so I've got old field map data. That would be previous years of data. So I've got some 2014 data in here. I got some 2020 data. Anything that's older than a year, I don't have a problem exporting, but I always tell everybody, I really want to save that data. I don't want to just plain hit delete. Yep. So if we stick that in the side at this stage, we can do it now. Basically I brought my fields over, but there shouldn't be taking much space. Yeah. Yeah. So basically when I turn it on, anytime once I roll calendar, it's going to bring all my crop client farm fields over at that stage. So it should probably be kilobytes and not megabytes. So if I come in here and I select that field, now it's going to ask me, if I hit delete, are you sure you want to delete the data for the selected season? We all know that that's irreversible once we do that, right? Okay. I want to make sure you save it first to a USB stick, store that on your home computer. Okay. I can never recreate old data. So I actually have 20 years of data on my home computer. I keep a file with every year, and I have all my crop data built into that. So when I build prescriptions, I can go back any particular year and pull that data. Correct. Correct. And it may, like a lot of times, if I pull this 2020 data, it may actually give me a breakout of field by field. So there's all the fields I have, and I could actually come in and just export one field and just delete one field. Okay, so before I go to that delete, typically I come here to my data, I export it to, so I'm going to take it, I'm actually going to export this old field map data. Okay, and I'll export that to my stick. Once I have it exported, I can either delete all from that year, or I can just delete field by field. That's the only one I really recommend. No, because you're not going, I want you to save that, but I'd like that saved on a different stick, because you're not going to take it to your home computer probably. You can, and you can always pull it back from there. Okay. Oh, you can. Yeah. It'll keep them separate. It'll actually keep them separate. It'll have old field map data, so it'll bring it in by year is how that'll do that. Right, right. On my diagnose screen. Yeah, so the original question back here was, I moved on, I'm sorry. Yeah, so the question is, when we transfer, do we transfer all the data or just field by field? Okay. Old field map data. Let me go back here. Yeah, I really like to keep those separate. So do I keep them on the same stick or do I put them on different sticks? I like to keep a stick in the cab with all my crop configuration data. I like that as a separate stick at that stage. Because once I take a stick to the house, I got 40 USBs in my office. I never get the right one back to the cab is what happens. Yeah, so let me back up. My next question was, where do we go to see that device status? So here's where we see that, is back there, my disk usage. Now you may have different, if I went around the room, you may have different amounts of gigabytes of storage because everybody may have different hardware versions. So that third box down on the left, depending upon what year you bought your 2020, there's different hardware versions. Basically, that's the processor that's in that unit. So if you've got two 2020s, one might show you a hardware version of 5 or 4. If it's a 0, I can no longer update that monitor. Okay. Everything else is all updatable at this point. It's rebuildable. If you ever have problems, we can send it in and get them rebuilt. If you need to update, and be aware, touch screens do wear out. Okay, a touch screen that like what we're using on here. Every time I press on that, there is two surfaces. There's a gas layer between the two. If the seal breaks, you lose the gas between it, and a touch button screen will lose the ability to touch. Okay? We've seen these last 10, 15 years. We've seen them last 6, 7 years. They would tell you original expectation was 6 to 8 years. Unless you're having a problem, I never worry about it. A new screen, just a screen only, is about $300. Okay, so it pays to rebuild them if you need to, but just be aware that they do lose what I call that seal between those two panes of glass. It's a very thin layer. Questions on my import, export? Let me go back here on an export. You notice I do have a configuration transfer if you're going to take information over if you ever update to a Gen 3 somewhere in the future. So just be aware that that is there. That was, if you don't have that, that is in the 20.0. I don't know which version we put that in. It's on there. Okay. Questions on any of this? If I'm doing prescriptions and I have somebody build those for me, basically I can come here to my data, I hit import, and now I can bring that in. It's going to ask me for that field at that stage. Now, basically that brings all those prescriptions into the system. I still have to go assign the field to the boundary or to the prescription. What I mean by that. So if I come here to my setup mode, I come to my field name, and you notice right now I'm set to driving fast. I do not have a prescription assigned to this. That's where I have to go and actually select on that, and I actually have to assign that boundary to that. It'll bring boundary, it'll bring prescription in at that stage. Okay, so if you're just doing a boundaries only, maybe you're doing an RTK with waterways, not a problem. We would bring in a boundary file. Okay, that's how we get to that. Now, if you're working with somebody that's building prescriptions for you, I always encourage you to make sure that they assign a attribute to that. Is it population? Because you may be doing prescriptions with a liquid application. Okay, I do both on mine. So I always have them build that right in, so when I actually pull that up, so my prescription, now what I have here is a pretty simple system. I got headlands, I got the demo boundaries of this demo population. But if I had liquid, I could have 40 or 50 different prescriptions in here, depending upon what all we're doing. Okay. I think from the setup screen, we kind of covered all my, what I call all my planter tabs. I want to go back to system, because here's another category we need to probably bring up. We've been through the display. Let's take a look here at my GPS. So here's where I actually set up my tractor, my planter. If I'm doing swath control with my planter, I have to build this information into it. And basically, I'm going to pull up my chart. I'm going to tell it where that receiver is mounted. And I'm going to plug in inches where it's actually sitting in proportion. I do that not only on the tractor, I'm actually going to do it on the planter as well. So depending upon what style I have, I got to tell it, is it a draw planter hooked or pinned through the drawbar, a 2-point, which probably most of you would be running, or maybe a 3-point. Okay, I'm using a drawn here. Now I probably am running if I'm running a deer planter, probably something closer to this. If I'm running a 1770 NT, my 4 rows in the center are a little farther back with my seed tube exit than my other rows. So once this is set up, this shouldn't change, but you do notice when I'm coming in here, I have another button over on the right-hand side that's called GPS offset. And all this does, I want everybody to double check this every year. When you hook your planter up, I want you to go out in the barnyard, drop 2 flags, set 1 flag outside the center of the gauge wheel on each row, each side, okay? And you go enter, and it tells you to go out, make a circle. If I've got auto steer, I just set an AB line, I come back on the same AB line. And you're going to say what? Drive forward, turn around, drive toward the flags, making sure that we stop exactly when I come back to that same point. And if I plug this in, it's going to tell me how close was I. And that's the information that I have entered in.
Ken, when you drop or when you put the flags down, is it best to lower your planter all the way down to the ground when you put your flags down and then pick it back up to turn around?
I have a tendency to do that because it does change, right? So I actually set down to where I'm actually touching the ground with my row unit. I don't always put all the weight on it, but I do drop that so it is touching the ground. There is another button here called the GPS communication. Basically, it'll tell me how many satellites I have in view, and it'll tell me what my NEMA messages are. I really need all those set to 5 hertz if I'm in any of my, you may be a single hertz if you're using what I call a hockey puck, okay? If I'm using tied into any of my GPS steering systems on tractors, should be 5 hertz. Could be 10, but I'm not too worried about that. I like 5. As I mentioned that, if I have a day where I'm having a lot of sunspot activity, last year we had 1 day in the middle of spring where we had a lot of sunspot activity and actually knocked out some GPS systems. Okay, what's your backup plan? Do you have radar on your tractor? Are you going to set, so if I'm looking for a prescription, I can't plant to the prescription if I don't have GPS data. I'm losing location of where I'm at in that field. Now, radar will still give me speed, right? So I can still go ahead and I can swath correctly at that stage. So there's the GPS. If I'm on an airbag system, you've got RUMs. You notice on this planner I have 3 RUMs. I would really encourage you to have at least 4, because if one ever goes bad and I'm trying to plant, I want my downforce to be active. I need a minimum of 3 for downforce to work on air force, any of my airbag systems. Okay. When I pull out in the spring, you notice right now I've got load weight. Basically, I may zero them all. When I raise that up, there's those gauge wheels should slide to that bottom. There shouldn't be any weight on those pins. Okay, so we can re-zero that, but they should be within a pound or 2. They shouldn't be off very far. I do have a row flow on here. So basically, this is where I'm setting up and telling it what all I have on here. I've got a single motor. My GPS offsets I've gone out and I've done. My swath configuration. Basically, once this is set up, you really don't come back and change this. There's my Air Force. Again, some of the things we saw on the diagnose screen, we're seeing the same thing. You notice I do have a hold time on here. So that 5 seconds hold time, what is that for? And I can actually change that. So back here, if I'm running and I have this hold button on the right-hand side, why would I use that? If I drop a planter down, I plant through a waterway. My waypins are going to be measuring weight on those gauge wheels going through that waterway. And they will start to change and increase or decrease my airbag pressure. If I hit the hold button, basically it's just going to lock the system and say, hey, I don't want to change it as I go through that waterway. It's there. Do you use it? Do you not use it? It's up to you. Okay. Depends upon if I have a lot of fields that have waterways, or if I have a swale or a draw that I go down through. Sometimes I'll actually lock that at that stage. You notice here I also have what I call 2 other buttons, the calibration. So basically this is kind of once I have it calibrated, I do want to make sure that my radar is calibrated. Basically it's just going to build that in. You can drive that. It's asking for pulses per foot. Actually asking you for what? 4 mile an hour at 300 feet. I do like to do this in the field, but it's probably not real critical. You can go out and do it on the driveway too. It's just depends upon where that radar gun is mounted, what angle that is. So it's just bouncing that radar pulse back. A little different than what I'm used to seeing, but could be fine for yours. So it depends upon how close to the ground. Yeah, no, as long as we're in, as long as I have something in there, I'm not worried about it.
And if you have a issue with your gun, that test you won't be able to calibrate it. It'll just say it. I forget what the message says, but failed to calibrate, or failed test, or something like that, and it'll just keep failing and failing. Usually that, and I have seen in some 8R tractors, newer ones even, those guns do go bad over time. So it's sometimes can be that issue. It's not fun having to put in a new $2,000 gun, but it happens. So
yeah. Yeah, and keep in mind that we do make a distinction between a true gun that's bouncing radar. Some of the salesmen have sold what I call radar. Basically, it's a simulator, so it's using GPS to convert to pulses to give you a radar signal. That will not be accurate. Okay, if I'm trying to pick up speed change for speed coming in and out of the headlands, I don't need a GPS because it's basically 10 times slower than what a true radar is. Okay. Now we do have health checks in here. So underneath that system tab, you notice down there, I do encourage everybody to come in here and run these. And depending upon what you have, it's going to tell you what. So I have it set up right now for row flow and Air Force. If I come in here on that health check, I can either run them all together, or I can actually take and just run individually. So a leak check's it's gonna tell me how long it'll take. What it does, it actually puts pressure on your hoses. So I do have to, if it's a hydraulic Air Force compressor, I gotta have hydraulics engaged, right? Don't forget that. I've had that phone call before. Okay. We just spin the compressor, we build air pressure. I'm gonna measure how, I gotta hold that for 3 minutes. I'm looking at the pressure drop in your up downs and your down lines. Okay. So we look at just compressor only. We look at basically my airbag system at that stage. I'm also checking my electric. Okay, so I can do them individually. I have a tendency to run them all together unless if I fail, then I'm going to come back and run them individually.
I'll just throw in there real quick. If you do that test, keep an airline snips and some soapy water around, start spraying fittings.
Yep.
If it's leaking, pull the fitting out, trim just a little bit off, and shove it back in, because airlines seal on the outside of the airline. So if it gets scratched up, it can tend to leak sometimes. But I will tell you that test is pretty sensitive. So if you fail the first time, watch your pressure when the compressor shuts off. It might drop 3, 4, 5 psi, and then it steadies out and stays there. So say it stops at 148 psi, and you watch it for 3 minutes, and it drops to 145 or 144, and it fails the check. And it's still pretty good. I mean,
Right.
sometimes you almost have to run that test a couple times. As long as you're not losing 10, 15 psi over that test, you're probably going to be all right. But keep some soapy water down and a good snips, and that's a easy way to pass that check. So
Yeah, and sometimes if you know that it's failing, I don't have a problem shutting the tractor off and then just go back and listen. But with the tractor running, you'll never hear a leak.
And with the air filters on any Precision air compressor, Precision and I are recommending that you can blow them out, but they're small enough just to put new ones in every year. So if you're gonna change them and they're struggling to keep up, that makes those things will hold quite a bit of dust for the size they are, but they do plug.
So I have Air Force. If you had Delta Force, that would be on here as well. Here's my Air Force. We can just come in here and actually run all that information as well. So I just encourage everybody, quick, easy way to make sure that system's ready to go. Questions on anything under my system tab? Okay, back to my home screen. What I'm kind of looking for here. You're all familiar that what I call dial down menus. So if I come into population, I'm just looking at every row. You're seeing I got 3 rows, 4 rows, kind of bouncing around, and we're turning around. Takes forever to turn around. There we come up again. So I can dial down to any one row. It's just telling me what that seed placement is on that particular row. I'm looking at skips, I'm looking at doubles. My yellow plant is always my misplaced seed. So if I'm running 7 mile an hour, do I expect to have a spacing issue? Yes. So my ride is causing misplaced seed limits to trigger at this stage. That yellow plant's just telling you, hey, you got a problem? Yes, we're losing dollars. What are you going to do about it? I like SRI, but good spacing kind of does the same thing. Okay. I have a tendency to watch SRI just because I understand it very well, and I got my own targets, what I'm looking for. I draw a pretty tight perimeter on SRIs. Singulation, downforce. We've kind of talked through downforce a little bit. Let's take a look here at downforce if I'm running. I always say I want my ground contact to be that 100%. Okay. And you notice here I got 3 waypins on this planner. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, how come I don't have weight on every row? So anytime it's under the bar, I'm losing ground contact. Basically think of that as ground zero. So as long as I'm above, I should be green. But I got times when I'm struggling to maintain ground contact at 100%. What would your decision be if you were running? If I come back here and I'm looking at my machine and I'm running, I get ground contact. I'm showing you 100 pounds, but my margin's pretty low, right? I really want you on up to that 60, 70, 80 pounds. Okay. I think we're fine-tuning too low of a value that we're trying to run in this field. Now, if it's a pretty damp field, not going to be a big issue to me. Because if soil is damp, does a row unit want to come up? No, your risk is it's actually sliding in with plenty of pressure at that stage. Delta is a little different, okay? And keep in mind, if I have an Air Force system, I'm looking at the last 3 seconds. 1 second of forward travel is 8 feet. So I'm looking at the last 24 feet. And I'm adjusting air pressure based on what I just saw. When I take delta force, I draw a line. And I'm saying every 12 to 15 inches, I'm making a change. And I can go from 0 to 600 pounds in 12 to 15 inches. With an Air Force, I got to add air. I got to do that fairly slow. It's going to take me probably 100 feet to make a rapid change. If I drive across where I had an old driveway in that field, okay, I'm never going to be accurate because it takes too long to respond to it. Yes. Yeah, so typical margin, and here's what I always tell everybody, my goal or my target would always be, and if I come in here and I look at Air Force, okay, so there's my Air Force target, and let me just start with Air Force and then I'll get into Delta Force, okay? So Delta Force, and I made the statement that I know that my average is the last 24 seconds if I'm 5 mile an hour, okay? And you notice my target here is sitting from 30 to 80 pounds. That is standard mode. I think that's too light. Okay. My new software today, so your 2020-0-4 software is going to have a higher target at that point. Now, I can come in, I can go to heavy, okay, and heavy is 80 to 100, but you notice my box got smaller at the same time. So I've only got a 40-pound range that I'm trying to hit at that stage. Whereas back here on standard, I was running from 30 to 80, I got a 50-pound range. If I'm running Air Force, and look at my little black box underneath, once I'm in target, I'm changing my air, adding air faster or slower, depending upon is it in the green zone or is it out of the green zone. And what I mean by that, my valves. So I said I had 4 valves if I got down and lift on Air Force. And I'm adding air, and we control how fast that air goes in. If I'm outside of the target, so if that bottom black diamond is not in the target zone, it's adding air 4 times faster than if I'm in the target zone. So I like to keep a box pretty narrow. Now, this is my automatic modes. I have a tendency to come to custom mode, and now I have to tell it, well, how big that box is. I can squeeze it smaller, or I can make it bigger. Now, I can only make it so that I actually travel 60 pounds anywhere in that zone. It's going to add air slower because I'm going to be in that zone for a longer period of time. If I squeeze that, and I have a tendency to always run squeezed if I'm running hydraulic air force systems, because I've got plenty of air. I don't have to worry about using up too much air. Now, I want to take and control where I'm going to set this. So I always say the first day I'm going to run, and if I know I'm on an Air Force system, I'm going to start about 70 to 110. Because I know I'm going to be outside of that range some of the time. I don't want to be light enough that I'm actually letting that row unit come up out of the ground, plant corn shallow. But I know if I'm too heavy, my risk is I'm going to cause hatchet roots, sidewall compaction. So I squeeze the box, and I'm going to start about 70 to 110. If I'm day one, that's where I start. Day two, same thing as day one. Why? I know that for every one of us, the first day we start to plant, typically 80% of the field is pretty nice, and there's 20% that's got a few little marginal areas, what I call the damp areas. As I get drier, so day 3, day 4, I'm still planting, is the damp areas getting smaller? Yes. Okay, do I want to go up in down pressure at that stage? What's the advantage of going up in down pressure? Row unit ride is going to increase, right? The more weight I pull down with my gauge wheel, so basically we're just taking that airbag, we're transferring weight from the bar to the gauge wheel, and the more weight I put on, the less row unit bounce I'm going to get, the smoother the ride. So I always tell everybody, ideally, I want to go to where I have hatchet roots, where I smear the sidewall, and then I want to back off about 20 pounds. So day 1, 70 to 110. If I'm still planting day 3, day 4, I'm going to have you on up probably 90 to 130, maybe on up to 100 to 140. Last year when you turned dry, I went 35 days without a rain at home. I had a lot of guys I was telling, hey, slide that dude on up 120 to 160. Okay, no risk that I will ever compress hatchet roots at that stage. Now, this is Air Force, if I come in here and I change this, so if I come in, I set up, hang on, if I change this to Delta Force, now when I come in here, you notice I don't have a target anymore. I draw a line. I'm going to hit that line. Now I'm still in what I call my ability. I'm in custom mode, and I can come in here and set this. I'm going to have a tendency, if I have Delta Force, I'm going to start about 85 to 90 pounds the first day. Day 2, day 3, if I'm still planting, I'm going to start sliding that up. I may take that on up 90, 95. And what I'm really looking for is back on the home screen. Okay? If I'm back here and I'm looking at ground contact, as long as I'm staying 98 to 100 at all times, 96 worries me. 98, borderline. Okay, my margin of 0 says it's got to go up. Okay, this is recorded in Air Force, so even though I have Delta Force, I cannot run it with Delta Force because it's a pre-recorded field. Comfortable with that?
So, 100% ground contact margin on Delta Force.
I'd be pretty comfortable at that point. I like to be under 100 if I can, unless I'm getting pretty dry. So I start day 1, 85 to 90. Day 2, same thing as day 1, because you all planted your dry field first. Okay, day 3, day 4, I'll slide on up 90 to 100 at that stage. That's margin. Okay, I never show you what actual is unless I have a field view map, or I'm actually building a map and showing you if you're using Panorama or something like that. Because what I don't care is how much does it take to get the row unit in the ground, right? I know what is pushing into the ground is basically I got to jam this disc opener in. What's all pushing up? Closing wheels. Okay, takes pressure pushing up. Same thing with row cleaners, right? As I'm trying to hold a row cleaner in, that's pushing row unit up. I can tell you on my planter, I'm going to take anywhere from 150 to 200 pounds to get my row unit into the ground at all times. I really don't care what it takes. What I care is how much is left. So I got some rows. I run a Delta Force. I got a Deere row unit on it. I'm actually lifting some of my rows with 200 pounds of lift. I got some of my rows around where I have my wheel tire prints where it's taking 150 pounds down to get into the ground. And I know that a John Deere cast iron row unit weighs 265 pounds. Comfortable with downforce here at this stage. Comfortable with margin. Now, the best way to check is always check my driest soil and check my wettest soil. So when I go up over that hill and I got that one hillside that always has a little bit of damp soil in it, I got to stop that planter, get off and dig. And don't chew out the guy that's driving the planter tractor. How come you're not planting? Okay, there's a lot of money to be made to stop in those places. Now, if you have multiple people in the operation, have somebody chase it with a four-wheeler and come out and dig in those spots. Make sure they're good while you're still burning, getting acres in the ground. Standard joke at our place, if the planter ever stops, somebody's on the phone asking, hey, you broke down, you got a problem, what's going on? Why is that planter stopped? Okay, we understand how that works. Singulation, downforce, margin, we've been through that. Good ride, vacuum, SRI, low speed start. Basically, I can control my low speed start if I back into the corner, spin these clutches, right? Some of you may use that, some of you may not. What kind of questions we got? Yeah. I'm sorry, say that again. Yeah, so on vacuum, and it really depends a little upon my seed size, right? Typically, we would tell you you can't hardly get too much vacuum, but about the time I say that, you can. Anywhere in that 18 to 22 pounds should be a pretty adequate for most scenarios. If I'm planting a big 60 pound bag, you know, if they had to cut my 80,000 count down to 60s, you got gumballs that you're trying to plant. Every once in a while they throw a variety at you like that. You're probably gonna have to be 24, 25 inches of vacuum at that stage. If I got a 32, 35 pound small seed, I may be down 17, 18. I don't run more than I have to. And a lot of times I always say my singulation map should be telling me pretty well. I can turn vacuum up. If I'm not getting doubles, it doesn't hurt me. If I crawl out of the tractor, it drives me up a wall. Listen to that fan scream. So I have a tendency to run no more than what I need.
So, Dan, I'm going to expound on that. I'm going to use you as a little bit of example. Because last year we had a fun time with some seed. Remember that? So we had some 35-pound flats, and he had a brand new VSET meter, and it struggled. It still did good. I mean, we were still in the 98.7 to 99.3 range, which typically for a VSET meter or an ESA, usually like that 99.5 or better. But we struggled. And our SRI went from 12, 13, 14, 15 up to an 18, 19, 20. So we just saw some spacing issues, but that's just such small seed. So yeah, dropping your vacuum down. We tried some smaller disc. Eventually at a point, that's just an abnormally small seed. And I was running a 60-pound flat couple days ago with a customer, and he's like, "Well, what kind of range can you run?" I'm like, "Well, if you're seeing a lot of skips, increase your vacuum to help suck that to the plate." So do you have the skips multiple reading up there? So I look at that skips multiple reading. So if I have a 0.5% on skips and 0% on multiples, well, that tells me I'm skipping a little more. So I'm going to take my vacuum from a 19.2 and an 18.2. I might take it up to a 20, 21, and a 20 and a half, see what happens. You should see those skips start to go down a little bit and those multiples maybe start to come. So right now, the skips and multiples are about split. That's about what I shoot for. I'd rather see a few more multiples than I would skips, agronomically speaking. But I took the SRI, or our test stand. I was running 21 and a half. And I was like, oh yeah, watch it. I'll drop the vac down to 10 and you'll see it start skipping. Well, it ran a 99.8 on the test stand. It was running about perfect at 10. Now I just took my hand, I just tapped it a little bit, and I lost like 5 seeds off the meter because it wasn't sucking very hard. And so, but I took it up to 24, 25, and it still ran good. So use that skips and multiple reading to set your vacuum is what I would encourage. Is that fair, Ken?
Yeah, no, I think that's very accurate of where I'm at. Now, understand, the rougher the ride, probably the higher the vacuum has to be at that stage, right?
Correct. Yep.
So my types of tillage affects that and how smooth my connections are. What other questions are we running into? Yeah, there's a couple of ways to do it. How do you have most of your customers doing that, Jason? So if I'm going to shut off a row or two, if if I'm just wanting to plant sweet corn or something like that.
Who asked the question? Dan did. So if you go, I believe, into, it'll be your V drive settings, Dan, or your V drive control button on from the home page. So home page, and hit V drive in the bottom right corner there. You should have the ability. It says clutch from the left or right. I don't know if it's showing. Do you have it? There should be an option. You can choose what clutch you want.
Yeah, let me change. I don't have it pre-recorded, so I'll have to go to.
It's a little hard without being hooked up to the planter. Typically, we just run the corn down. So you can't deactivate rows because that turns off your delta force. Well, I guess you could deactivate those rows, Ken, couldn't you? If you don't want it to plant.
Yeah, I mean, usually that's what I would do.
Go into your crops page, deactivate those rows. So if you go to your home button, setup, crops, and there's an active rows right there. It should say all. So you can.
So right now they're all on.
Correct.
I can come in and I can actually knock out. This is how I do sweet corn, is just coming over and planting, 2, 3, 4 rows.
So that will deactivate that row. So if you're running a monitor only, and you just have a seed tube sensor on that row, it's going to deactivate that seed tube sensor. If you're chain drive, it'll keep playing. So if you have a bad seed tube sensor, that's a good way to ignore that sensor until somebody gets here to get you a new one, so you're not getting annoyed the whole time and screaming at you. If you have a control system like V drive, Delta Force, something in there as well, it will also deactivate those products. But if you don't want to plant seed, that's fine. So if your seed sensor goes bad, Dan, and you want to deactivate it, but you want to keep planting corn, this would not work. But if you want to quit planting corn, that would be an option there. So in the crops tab, just choose what active rows you want.
Yeah, I was going to show you. You know,
Yes,
and
sir.
when we talk
Oh.
through here,
Got another question here.
oh, I'm sorry.
So you're wanting to know if you can, on your ground drive system, if you, the 20, do you have one hydraulic drive motor? So you have one hydraulic drive motor, but you still have the left hand and the right hand ground drive clutch systems? Yes. Yeah.
If you got electric disconnect, yes. If you've got ground drive,
Well, he's got a hydraulic drive motor with electric disconnect clutches.
yeah, we can do
tie that
that.
into the swath. There's
We'll tie
harnesses
that
for
in the
that.
swath.
What kind of planter do you have? Oh, you bought that one, man. That's literally when I started selling precision planting. That's somebody sold me that stuff on that planter. Man, I was a little squirt. Oh my, yeah. So yeah, we can tie that in to your existing row flow system instead of having the motor clutch up on the end rows. We can have the electric shutoffs do that. Yep, good question.
Yeah, I thought I had a video showing pressure on that, but maybe I don't. Yeah, I don't. This really, and what I was wanting to talk about was how ride affects my seed at that stage. I'd have to do some digging for it. I apologize. I don't have it real easy.
Any questions from anyone else? Everyone understand ground contact and margin? Does that make sense to everyone? Or should I explain that a little more in depth what that is? Or all good? All good? Okay. See some non-heads. That's good. If not, blurt something out.
Yeah, I don't have anything in particular from here on. I can take any questions you want to chase, whether we do that as a group or whether we do one-on-one here afterwards. But
How much you covered V-Drive and Delta Force too as well? I mean, I think we kind of went through some of that.
yeah, we talked through the Delta Force a little bit. I didn't do a lot on V-Drive.
Did you talk about changing your swath timings?
Yeah, whether I have V-Drive or whether I have row flow, either one, there are a couple of tools in here, what we call advanced swath. So basically, and I can actually create what I call a headland. So basically, if I've got boundary files, it'll actually allow me to draw a square around my field and plant my outside rows last. If anybody's using track tractors. Sometimes when you turn around on the corners, you berm that up. I can actually create what I call a false boundary. It'll clutch off automatically. There could be times when you plant a field and you get rained out and you come back in and maybe my WAS has moved. Okay. So what do you do? Okay. Now I got a couple of things I can do. There's a draw coverage on this right-hand side. Right now it's set to normal. If I come in here and click on that, at this stage, if I drive my planter, it's going to paint just like I'm painting. So if I had planted my end rows a week ago, I come back today and it's like everything moved off a foot, 2 feet. I know my swath timing is going to be off. So if I have lost that, I can actually recreate my boundary by raising the planter up, just driving across the inside end row, and it'll actually repaint that. Now my clutch timing will be correct at that stage. Okay, that's where we would do this, whether it's row flow or whether that's V-drive, either one. So basically here, what I call my, whether it's V-drive or row flow on the right-hand side is going to be that advanced swath tools. And that's where we come into that.
So a little note on that. So say your map physically moved, which means it thinks your seed, instead of being planted here, was planted over here. So now you're going to have a gap or an overlap of 3, 4, 5, 6. I've seen it move 15, 20 feet before. This is not very normal, but it does happen. So we can repaint, but we would have to delete the coverage map first to redo that. Did you talk about deleting the coverage map?
We did.
Okay, so go right before you make the field active, delete the coverage map. All that deletes is the paint, doesn't delete the planting data. So you can scrap that paint away, relay a new line, just on the north and south or the east and west, whichever way you're planting, that inline, that first headland, just drive it with your planter up, and when you're done, stop painting, and then you can keep going. So it's a nice option, but I've only used it a few times.
Right.
It's not normal.
I always say it's a worst case scenario, but it's there, so don't panic at that stage.
Now you guys know. So if you ever need it, you're like, man, what did Ken Souter say? I knew there's something here. Except you're going to call me, not him. So
But there is another button on here that's called the AutoMap Express, and you would have that if you've got V-drive or if you've got row flow. Basically, if I come in here and if I had let's see if I can find a field that I have that on. So basically what I have here is just a single map on that field. I have basically, there's my headlands that's in there. Now notice it's kind of whopper jawed because of how I've loaded this, but I can actually come in and I can edit existing zones. Right now I only have one built into this particular field, but I can actually select that soil type, and I can actually change by a percentage. So if I want, I can come in and I can actually go up 5%. So I was 30, 32, just change it to 33.6, or I can come in and I can actually edit it down. So a lot of times if I have my crop consultant build me prescriptions, I actually build two, whether I'm a determinate hybrid or a flex hybrid. I have a higher population for my determinate hybrids than I have for my flex. But if I've changed my mind, I'm sitting here today and I got plans made for what hybrid I'm going to put in the field. We all know that come spring, all of a sudden you call an audible, right? I can come in here, I can adjust my populations up or down. So just be aware that's there based upon what all my prescriptions are.
unless you have an incredibly detailed map. Sometimes if the I think if they call it the DPI, if the pixels are too intense or your zones are too small, the 2020 might not be able to process that and do that. But most prescriptions it should be able to.
So there, I've got a couple of different ones in here on this field. And I can just adjust those up or down. Now I can select certain ones or I can select them all. That would change everything. Just went up by 500. Okay.
So Ken, when we do that, does it create save a new prescription name,
It actually saves it.
or does it edit the old one?
It edits the old one, okay? But you will still have the original in there as well, but it defaults to the new one at that stage.
So I can go back and find my old one.
You can
and
go back and
re-sign
find your
to
old
it.
one.
Gotcha.
Or I can just come in and change one by itself. When I hit save, basically I just saved it over the top of the old at this point. What haven't we answered for you today? For most of you, it's just a review. For a few of you, you got further questions, we definitely want to dig into that before you leave today. Okay. I don't want to belabor this and hold you on what there's value here for you.
Couple things, couple refreshers. If you have a Gen 1, if you run the FieldView app or an iPad along with it, remember you got to have the FieldView module to run the iPad along with the 2020. The module wires into the back of the power plug on the back of the 2020, little USB cable, then plug into the side of the display. You don't know if you have a Gen 1 or Gen 2. You have 2 USB ports on the side if you have a Gen 1. You have Gen 2, you have 1 USB port on the side. You have a Gen 2 display. If you're plugging in your iPad, it plugs directly in to the back of the 2020 in the iPad port. Like it's the second or third one down.
Mm-hmm.
Third one down. That it will work on other ports. That port that says iPad has extra power put to it so it can charge your iPad. If you're having connectivity issues, doing a hard reset on your iPad, holding the home button and the power button at the same time, and waiting for the display to shut or the iPad to shut down is a good reboot. Not just the typical hold the power button and slide it to shut off. Don't do that. If you don't know how to do it, Google it and it'll pull up on your iPad how to do hard reset. I also recommend using good cables. If you like to buy the on-brand cable from Walmart, you're probably going to have a few more connectivity issues. The tips just don't last as long. I'm a fan. If you're running an iPad, I like Apple products. I like Anker products. Griffin's been okay for me, but buy a good cable. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on FieldView connectivity.
Say we if you call into our office, we'll always tell you Anker cables is always where you want to be.
I like
it's a heavier cable, and we just don't have issues with them.
Yep, they build good stuff. Trying to think of any startup issues. Talk about Air Force not working or Delta Force not working if you're not planting seed.
Did not.
You guys try to go out and test your planter this year. I just want to make sure my airbags are working. I just want to try Delta Force and drag it through the field. Air Force and Delta Force will not operate if you're not planting seed. It doesn't want to waste a precious commodity like air out of your compressor if you're not planting. So you got to have at least 1 or 2, maybe 4 rows planting.
4 rows ideally.
For those products to operate. So that's just some testing that we're looking at. I'm just going to reinforce again, if you have a system that swaths on the end rows or clutches, please, please, please run a few passes, check your timings, make sure it's right. Don't trust it after day 1. Check it every couple days. If you're the hired hand and you're just walking out in the field and you're waiting for somebody to come up to the end, dig up on the end rows, make sure you don't have gaps. We see those things from time to time. Something gets fudged around or a piece of equipment gets changed and people just assume it's the same, and it can change over time. It doesn't normally, but I encourage that to double check those things. If anyone's running high speed in here, it's got speed tubes. Maintenance on those, make sure you keep good feeder wheels on. We recommend those being changed every year. For vac meters, open up your meters if you didn't have them tested this year, blow them out, check them, clean the seals, rag and Windex, clean your seals. Go to the local Kinsey or Deere dealership, or from us, buy a can of aerosol graphite spray. It's a lubricant. Take your disc out in the stones, lay them out there, spray this on like spray paint. It's got alcohol, it dries in about a minute. Spray them twice, get a good coat on there. That'll help your discs not to get eaten into by your seals. Makes them last longer. Quick, easy things to check. Clean out your seed tubes. If you really probably should pull your seed tubes, get all that dirt out of there that builds up underneath them. You guys know what I'm talking about? When you're in the field and that's back to dirt, nobody likes to try to pull a seed tube. Just some little things like that. Take a chain off your main drive and go to your hex shaft. Just take a cresser wrench and spin it. How easy does your planter spin? You spin pretty good, or are you having a wrench on it? If you're having a wrench on it, you might have some bad chains, bad bearings somewhere. Spray some penetrating oil in your bearings. Never hurts. There's just a handful of some little things you can check into. I can keep talking about it. I don't want to hold you guys here. So, any other questions?
We'll be around here as long as you guys want. Be glad to take one-on-one, chase anything you want to chase down. But we appreciate it very much.
Yep.
Our hope, our prayer for each one of you is safe and quick spring whenever it happens.
Hopefully April 15th will start. Buys me a little time to get some things done. But awesome, guys. Well, thanks for coming. Like I said, we have a lot of cleanup here to do, so we're going to be here for a while. So if you have questions, feel free to bug us. You might have to wait in line a little bit, but we'll be glad to answer anything we have for you guys.
Safe travels, safe journey home. Thanks for coming.